That night in Harlem, loyalty cost $30,000, and betrayal cost a man his life. Bumpy Johnson didn't send a shooter. He didn't whisper an order. He lifted the glass himself, looked his oldest friend in the eyes, and poured the poison down his throat. Slow, deliberate, unforgiving. The room was quiet enough to hear a man swallow. A smile froze halfway across a familiar face, and in that silence, everyone understood something terrifying. This wasn't rage. This was judgment. But what happened next, no one in that room was prepared for. Harlem in those years didn't wake up. It exhaled. The streets breathed out cigar smoke, frying grease, cheap perfume, and fear. Morning light slid down brick buildings, like it didn't want to stay too long. Men stood on corners pretending to read newspapers they already knew by heart, their eyes scanning reflections in shop windows. Police cars rolled slow, not hunting, not helping, just reminding everyone who really ran the block. This was Bumpy Johnson's city. Not on paper, not in court records, but in the way doors opened before he knocked and stayed shut long after he left. The photograph people still study today, the one used in thumbnails, arrows pointing at Bumpy's stiff posture, circles around the men behind him, was taken on a calm afternoon that should have meant nothing. He's standing half-turned, hat low, coat perfectly pressed. His face is unreadable, but his jaw is tight. That's what most miss. In Harlem, a tight jaw meant calculations were happening. Lives were being weighed. Power in New York wasn't just Italian, no matter what Hollywood says. Lucky Luciano understood that early. He didn't respect many men, but he respected efficiency, and Bumpy was efficient in a way that scared people. Where others used noise, Bumpy used silence. Where others demanded loyalty, Bumpy inspired it. Harlem paid him not because they feared him, but because they trusted him. And trust was currency. Behind every polished shoe and clean suit was a structure older than the buildings. Numbers runners moving slips through beauty salons. Jazz clubs washing money through laughter and trumpets. Porters on trains carrying whispers between cities. And at the center of it all, quiet but immovable, was Bumpy, shaking hands with preachers on Sunday, meeting Luciano's people by Tuesday, settling disputes before blood ever hit pavement. But power like that attracts parasites. There's a man in another black and white photo. Usually cropped out, barely mentioned, he's leaning in too close, smiling too easily. This was the friend, the one who knew Bumpy before the suits, before the headlines, the man who sat at his table, ate his food, laughed at his jokes, the man who'd been there when Harlem was still being carved up piece by piece. $30,000 doesn't sound like much today. Back then it was a fortune. Enough to buy silence, loyalty, or death. Enough for Luciano's rivals to start asking questions they already knew the answers to. Enough to make someone wonder if friendship was worth more than cash stacked neatly in a briefcase. In smoke-filled rooms downtown, men spoke softly about Harlem's future. About cutting Bumpy out, about poisoning the well instead of starting a war. And every conversation ended the same way. You need someone close to him. That's when the phone rang. The photo shows Bumpy mid-step, just turning toward the sound. You can almost see the moment his instincts pricked. His eyes aren't surprised, they're cautious. He knew the streets were too quiet. He knew peace never lasted this long without a price. Still, he answered, because when power believes in loyalty, it never suspects the knife is already inside the house. And somewhere, not far away, a man counted $30,000 and convinced himself he'd made the smartest decision of his life. Something was wrong. In the photograph taken that week, his hand rests on the back of a chair, fingers curled just a little too tight. Men who knew him noticed that detail later. They said his grip meant restraint. It meant he was holding something back. Bumpy Johnson never fidgeted without a reason. If his hand shook, the city was about to. Meetings continued like normal. Too normal. That's what bothered him. Harlem operators brought envelopes on time. Club owners smiled wider than usual. Even the runners seemed relaxed, laughing careless like men who thought tomorrow was guaranteed. Peace like that didn't happen by accident. It was usually purchased, and Bumpy knew someone somewhere had paid for something. He started watching instead of talking. In one smoke-filled back room, a trusted lieutenant leaned in too close while speaking. His voice was steady, but his eyes flicked to the door twice in under a minute. Another man agreed too quickly to a proposal that should have sparked an argument. Bumpy noticed how no one disagreed with him anymore. Fear makes men quiet, guilt makes them agreeable, and then there was his friend. The man who'd known him before Harlem knew his name. The one who poured drinks without being asked. The one who sat down uninvited, a privilege very few men still had. In a black and white still from that night, he's smiling, but it's the wrong smile. Too stiff, too rehearsed. His jaw is set like he's memorized his lines and is terrified of forgetting them. Bumpy watched him closely, not accusing, not confronting, just observing. Years in the underworld teach you one thing above all else: the truth leaks. It leaks through fingers, through posture, through breath. And this man's breath was shallow. They spoke about nothing important. Weather, business rumors, a fight that broke out in a club uptown. But beneath every word was a tension that pressed against the walls. At one point, the friend reached for his glass and missed it by an inch. He laughed it off. No one else did. Bumpy didn't laugh either. He remembered Lucky Luciano once telling him, "The most dangerous men aren't the ones who hate you. It's the ones who still sit at your table." That memory surfaced now, uninvited, heavy. So Bumpy set a test. Not a threat. Not a trap anyone could see. Just a simple shift. He changed a routine meeting location without announcing it publicly. Only a handful of people knew. Within hours, word came back. Downtown people were already talking about it. Wrong people, people who shouldn't have known. That's when Bumpy stopped wondering. He confirmed it the way old kings always do, by watching who couldn't meet his eyes. The friend talked more that night. Too much. Jokes ran longer. Stories wandered. Men who are lying often try to fill silence before it exposes them. Bumpy let him talk. Let him sweat. Let him sink. Inside there was no rage, no heartbreak, just a cold, surgical clarity. $30,000. That's what his life was worth now. In the photo from the following evening, Bumpy's face looks calm, almost peaceful. That's the most terrifying version of him. Cam meant the decision had already been made. Cam meant there would be no second chances. If you were in that room, would you have spoken up? Would you have run? Or would you have trusted a friend because history told you to? Bumpy trusted history, and history had taught him this. Betrayal doesn't knock, it pours itself a drink and waits. And as the glasses were set on the table, and the door closed with a soft final click, the test was over. The setup didn't feel like a setup. That was the genius of it. No dark alley, no masked gunman, just a familiar room, familiar faces, and a table that had hosted 100 nights of laughter and quiet deals. The photograph everyone studies now shows the table from a strange angle. A bottle in the foreground, a shadow cutting across the wall, a man half-seated like he hasn't decided whether to stay or leave. This was the last calm moment before everything tilted. Bumpy chose the place on purpose. It was neutral ground. No one would expect violence there. The kind of spot where men let their guard down because history told them they were safe. The friend arrived early, which alone said more than words ever could. Early meant anxious. Early meant he needed control over at least one thing in a night already slipping away from him. He ordered drinks without asking anyone else. Whiskey for himself, something darker for Bumpy. A small detail, but in this world details were confession. Bumpy arrived last. The room shifted when he stepped in. Conversations didn't stop. They stumbled. Chairs scraped just a bit too loudly. Someone coughed to cover the sound of tension settling in. In the photo taken seconds later, Bumpy's hat is still on. That mattered. He only removed it when business was finished. Tonight, business was just beginning. The friend stood quickly, too quickly, knocked his chair back, apologized even though no one had said a word. He reached for Bumpy's coat like he'd done 1,000 times before. Bumpy didn't let him, just gave him a look. Not angry, not suspicious, final. They sat. The drinks came. This is where most people think the betrayal happened. They imagine poison already mixed. A bartender paid off, a plan in motion. That part is true, just not the way you think. The poison wasn't meant to work fast. It was meant to make Bumpy sick, weak, vulnerable. Enough time for someone else to step in later. The friend didn't plan on being the one to die. As the glasses touched the table, Bumpy noticed something small. The friend's hand trembled just once when he pushed the glass forward. Not enough for anyone else to catch. Enough for a man who'd survived prison, wars, and Luciano's politics. Bumpy picked up the glass. He didn't drink. Instead, he talked. He spoke about old days, about Harlem before money poisoned it, about loyalty when it meant starving together instead of getting rich apart. His voice was calm, almost warm. That's what broke the friend. You can see it in the photograph, sweat gathering at his temple, eyes darting between the glass and Bumpy's face. Then Bumpy did something no one expected. He switched the glasses, just for a second, just enough to watch the reaction. The friend froze. Not long, just long enough. That was the moment the betrayal stopped being a suspicion and became a fact. Bumpy leaned back in his chair, studying the man like a judge who already knows the verdict, but wants to hear the lie anyway. "You look nervous," he said quietly. "Something wrong with the drink?" The friend laughed. "Too loud." "Nah, just thinking about $30,000, thinking about how fast loyalty dissolves when money enters the room." Bumpy reached for the bottle, poured fresh liquor into his own glass. Then, slowly, deliberately, he lifted the poisoned one. The room went still. This wasn't how executions happen. This wasn't how betrayals were punished. This was personal, intimate, a message no bullet could ever send. Bumpy stood, walked around the table, and stopped in front of his friend. The man looked up at him, eyes wide now, stripped of every lie he'd practiced. "You already sold your life," Bumpy said softly. "Might as well finish the transaction." And before anyone could move, before anyone could speak, Bumpy tilted the glass forward. "If you were in that room, would you have screamed? Would you have tried to stop him? Or would you have stayed frozen, knowing history was being written in silence?" The poison slid past the man's lips. He coughed once, then again. Panic replaced greed in a heartbeat. Chairs moved back. Someone stood. Someone else turned away, unable to watch. Bumpy didn't blink, because this wasn't murder to him, it was accounting. And as the glass hit the floor and shattered like loyalty itself, the room understood something irreversible had just happened. The explosion didn't come with gunfire. It came with breath, ragged, broken, desperate. The man's body betrayed him before his mind could catch up. His throat tightened like a fist had closed inside it. His hands flew to his chest, knocking the table hard enough to rattle every glass still standing. In the black and white photograph taken seconds later, one chair is already tipped backward, frozen mid-fall. That chair tells the whole story. That chair says no one planned for this to happen so fast. The friend staggered back, eyes wide, mouth open, trying to speak a name that would never help him now. Bumpy. The word died halfway out. This is where most people would have run. This is where a normal room would have turned into chaos, screams, doors slamming, men scrambling for exits. But this wasn't a normal room. This was Harlem's inner circle. These men had seen bodies before. They knew the rules. And the rule was simple. When Bumpy Johnson decided something, movement became permission, so no one moved. One man's hand hovered near his coat pocket, then slowly dropped away. Another stared at the floor like he'd just lost something he didn't want to admit he valued. The air thickened, heavy with alcohol, poison, and the realization that history had shifted directions. The man collapsed to his knees. The sound was ugly, human, final. Bumpy stood over him, not looming, not triumphant, just present. The photograph captures his shadow stretching across the floor, swallowing the manhole. Shadows mattered in Harlem. Shadows told you who would still exist when the lights came back on. The poisoned man gagged, fingers clawing at nothing. His eyes locked onto Bumpy's. There was no anger in them now. No greed, just confusion. A childlike disbelief that the person he trusted most was the one watching him die without flinching. "You didn't even ask how much," Bumpy said quietly. The words landed harder than any punch. $30,000 had erased decades of loyalty, had turned shared meals into rehearsals, had transformed friendship into an invoice waiting to be paid. The man tried to crawl, tried to reach Bumpy's shoes like proximity might save him. Bumpy stepped back once, not in fear but in refusal. He wouldn't allow the man to die touching him. Some boundaries remained sacred. A sound came from the man's throat, wet, rattling, final. His body convulsed, then stilled in stages, like a machine losing power piece by piece. One last breath escaped him, long and hollow, and then there was nothing left to take. Silence followed. Not the awkward silence of shock. The disciplined kind. The kind men learn in prisons and back rooms. A silence that acknowledged what had just been done without questioning it. Bumpy turned slowly, his eyes moving across the room. Each man felt that look land on him like a weight. This wasn't intimidation, it was instruction. "This is what $30,000 buys," Bumpy said. "A short life and a long warning." No one responded. They didn't need to. One man swallowed hard, another nodded once, barely noticeable. In the photo taken afterward, you can see the exact moment understanding spread. Shoulders slumped, eyes lowered, mouths closed. Harlem had just been reminded of its rules. The door opened, not rushed, not dramatic, just enough to let fresh air cut through the poison-thick room. Two men stepped in, quiet, efficient. They didn't look at the body long. Bodies weren't shocking. Orders were. Bumpy pointed once, that was all. As the body was lifted, someone's shoes scraped against the floor, leaving a faint streak. That streak would be scrubbed away later, but the memory of it wouldn't. Harlem would feel it in the way men spoke softer the next day, in the way deals got cleaner, in the way betrayal suddenly seemed expensive again. If you were watching this photo years later, you'd miss the most important detail. Bumpy's face as the room emptied. No satisfaction, no regret, just exhaustion. Because killing a friend doesn't harden a man, it clarifies him. And as the door closed behind the last witness, leaving only Bumpy in the fading smell of death, the city outside kept breathing, unaware that fear had just been recalibrated. But the consequences were already moving. Because when a king makes an example this personal, the streets don't just listen, they respond. Fear doesn't announce itself. It travels quietly, faster than gunshots, slipping through conversations, glances, and unfinished sentences. By the time the body was gone, Harlem already knew something had changed, even if no one could yet explain what. The photograph that surfaced days later shows an empty table, one chair missing, another pushed back awkwardly like it never found its place again. That image became legend not because of what it showed, but because of what it refused to show. No blood, no violence, just absence. In the underworld, absence is louder than screams. Word spread the way it always did, sideways. A barber paused mid-sentence and lowered his voice. A numbers runner stopped laughing when a name was mentioned. Club owners suddenly remembered debts they'd been slow to pay. Men who once tested limits stopped testing anything at all. Because this wasn't just a killing, it was a message wrapped in intimacy. Bumpy Johnson didn't outsource the punishment. He didn't send muscle. He didn't give orders from the shadows. He looked betrayal in the face and ended it with his own hands. That detail mattered. That detail terrified people. Police heard whispers but found nothing. No witnesses, no reports. Just a man who stopped showing up to places he'd always been. And in Harlem, disappearing wasn't suspicious. It was understood. Those closest to the dead man felt it worst. A woman waited 3 nights by a window before she stopped asking questions. A cousin tried to press for answers and was gently, firmly told to leave town. He did, immediately. Survival has a way of sharpening hearing. In one black and white street photo taken weeks later, Bumpy is walking alone. No entourage, no visible protection. That's power. Most people don't understand. Only men who know no one will touch them walk that way. His coat is open, his hands visible, calm, controlled, untouchable. Behind closed doors, meetings grew shorter. Fewer jokes, less alcohol. Men drank slower now, watched who poured, watched who reached first. Trust had become something fragile again, the way it was supposed to be. Lucky Luciano heard about it too. No praise, no condemnation, just acknowledgement. Because in that world, enforcement of loyalty was currency. And Bumpy had just spent some of his to remind everyone how expensive betrayal truly was. If you were in those rooms afterward, you would have felt it, the shift. Chairs pulled back an inch farther from the table, men choosing silence over cleverness. History never talks about this part, but this is how order is maintained. Not through constant violence, through unforgettable moments. And the most haunting part? No one blamed Bumpy. They blamed the man who forgot what loyalty meant. As nights passed, Harlem returned to its rhythm, music, laughter, deals. But underneath it all was a recalibrated fear. The kind that keeps cities stable and men alive. The kind that makes betrayal think twice, then think again. Because now everyone knew something they could never unknow. If Bumpy Johnson could do this to his closest friend, what chance did anyone else have? And as the city absorbed the lesson in silence, the final weight of that night began to settle. Not just on Harlem, but on Bumpy himself, because consequences don't end with the dead, they follow the living. The streets reacted before the history books ever could, not with riots, not with sirens, with behavior. That's how you measure impact in Harlem, not by headlines, but by how men adjust their footsteps. The very next morning, shopkeepers opened earlier than usual. Numbers runners stopped cutting corners. Corners themselves felt wider, emptier, like the pavement was giving people more room to think before they spoke. In one black and white street photograph taken days later, a group of men stand outside a barber shop. No one is laughing. One man's arms are crossed tight against his chest. Another stares straight ahead, jaw locked. Someone circled that image years later and wrote a single word beside it, after, because everyone knew what it meant. The story traveled without names at first. You hear what happened. They say it was personal. They say he did it himself. Each retelling sharpened the blade a little more. By the time it reached the far edges of Harlem, the message was clear even if the details were wrong. Loyalty had just been redefined. Men who once bragged about connections stopped mentioning them. A friend of a friend was no longer close enough to feel safe. Invitations got smaller, tables got quieter. Trust became something you earned again, slowly, carefully, like rebuilding after a fire. And then the name surfaced. Not shouted, not printed, whispered. The dead man's name became something people avoided, like it might contaminate the conversation. You could see it in photos from that month. Faces tightening when a sentence went too close to the truth. Eyes glancing around even when no one was listening. Fear doesn't need witnesses. It just needs memory. Bumpy watched all of it from a distance. There's a photo taken near a Harlem corner, early evening, shadows long. Bumpy is standing near a streetlight alone, watching traffic pass like he's counting something invisible. That image tells a different story than the others. This isn't power on display. This is a man living with what he's done. Because here's what most people don't understand. Enforcing order costs something. Even kings pay, especially kings. Bumpy didn't talk about that night, not once. He didn't justify it, didn't warn anyone afterward. The warning had already been delivered, and repeating it would have cheapened it. If you were on the street then, you felt safer and more afraid at the same time. Safer because rules were clear again. Afraid because the rules had teeth. This is where most people would have run. Left town, switched sides, disappeared. But they didn't. They adapted. That's the real aftermath. The city adjusted itself around a new center of gravity. Harlem didn't collapse. It tightened like a fist. And in that tightening, Bumpy's legend changed shape. He wasn't just the man who negotiated with Luciano. He wasn't just Harlem's protector. He became something colder, sharper. The man who would sacrifice his own heart to keep the structure standing? Street kids heard about it too. Not the money part, not the poison, just the lesson. Don't ever sell someone who trusts you. That's how stories survive. Simplified, moralized, turned into street law. History never talks about this part. It talks about empires falling, not the quiet moments that keep them from falling sooner. As weeks passed, the fear settled into something else. Respect edged with dread, the kind that doesn't fade with time, the kind that grows roots. And deep inside Bumpy, in a place no photograph could ever capture, something shifted permanently. He had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Not morally, practically. Because once the streets accept that you will do anything to maintain order, they expect you to keep doing it. And that expectation is a prison no walls can hold. But the final meaning of that night, the part that outlived everyone in the room, was still waiting to be understood. Because legacy doesn't show itself immediately. It waits, years passed. Harlem changed its clothes, but never its bones. Old clubs shut down, new faces took corners that once belonged to ghosts. But that night, the glass, the silence, the choice, stayed alive in whispers long after the people involved were gone. That's how real power survives, not in headlines, but in memory. There's a photograph taken near the end of Bumpy Johnson's life. He's older, heavier, sitting alone at a table, hands folded, eyes distant. People like to romanticize it, circle his face, talk about wisdom. What they're really seeing is a man who understands the full cost of loyalty and the unbearable weight of enforcing it. Because here's the truth history avoids. Bumpy didn't win that night. He endured it. Power demands proof, and proof always leaves scars. By pouring the poison himself, Bumpy sent a message no rival ever challenged. But he also locked himself into a role he could never escape. From that moment on, everyone believed the same thing. If Bumpy Johnson trusted you, he would protect you. But if you betrayed him, there was no distance he wouldn't cross to end you. That belief kept Harlem stable. It also kept Bumpy alone. The moral isn't simple, and it isn't clean. Loyalty without limits becomes blindness. Power without mercy becomes isolation. And survival in a world built on betrayal requires a kind of violence most men can't live with afterward. Was justice served on the streets? They'll tell you yes. Order was preserved. Chaos was avoided. Bloodshed was minimized by making one moment unforgettable. In that world, justice doesn't wear robes, it wears consequences. But if you look at the photographs closely, really look, you'll notice something chilling. After that night, Bumpy is never photographed laughing again, smiling maybe, but never laughing. That's the price history never includes. This story isn't about poison. It's about choice. About the moment a man decides whether loyalty is a feeling or a rule enforced at any cost. About how power protects communities and devours the people who wield it. About how legends are built from actions no one wants to repeat. And here's the final question, the one that still matters. If you had been Bumpy Johnson with Harlem depending on you, betrayal sitting across the table and $30,000 exposing the truth, would you have done the same? If this story shocked you, hit like, subscribe for real American crime stories, and comment below, do you think justice was ever served?